Welcome and howdy, everybody, to another episode of Songsmith, episode 15, What is the End Game? Or What's the End Game? Whatever I titled this episode. Today, we are going to be talking about what are your goals in music? What are the things you're actually trying to achieve out of it? Is it just for fun? Are you trying to go big? What are you trying to do with your music? Tons of different things you can do, tons of different paths to take, and we're going to talk about that today and kind of how that shapes your music journey and career. But with that out of the way, let's dive right into episode 15.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Songsmith. I'm your host, Keaton Williamson, and my goal is to help equip you to be the best musician you can be. The purpose of this show is to give you the knowledge it takes to be a successful songwriter, producer, and indie artist, while also honoring God in whatever music you create. We all want to be successful in this crowded space, so join me as we explore what it takes to be a songsmith.
All right, so today the main goal is to look at three broad views of the paths you can take in music. The first one we're going to cover is just going mainstream, just literally getting into it and running after it, whatever, trying to hit radio, do the tours, do the whole thing. On top of that, we are also going to talk about the just a hobby, just doing music for the fun of it, because sometimes that's all you really care to do it for. And then the third way is going to be the independent route, which is obviously kind of what this show is focused on, but I want to weigh the pros and cons of each and just give you guys a better idea of how each kind of works, at least from my understanding, what I've seen, what little I've experienced, heard about, etc. So yeah, the three main ones, like I said, are the big time route, people like Toby Mac, Newsboys, Mercy Me, Forrest Frank, all these different artists that you're going to be hearing on the radio, the type of people that are well known for being artists. This is oftentimes like this is my dream. I want to be playing the shows. I want to be doing the thing and all that kind of stuff. The fun, big, famous-ish kind of thing. The second one would be just music as a hobby, and this is just literally doing it for the fun of it because you enjoy doing it. Maybe it's with some friends, maybe it's just on your own, sitting in a bedroom writing some songs. It's not necessarily a big commitment. You might do some production, you might invest a little bit of money into it, but it's more so pretty casual, leisurely, etc. Third and finally, and my personal choice at least, is the independent route, which is still more committed to than the hobbyist, but it's not at the same level as, say, a mainstream artist. And again, we're going to weigh the pros and cons of each of these, and then I also have a little faith aspect at each of them, kind of my personal take on how that kind of plays into your faith, because everything you do in your life does play into how you as a person are shaped and how your views as a person and Christian are shaped. And they're not necessarily bad, but I just want to kind of focus in on those and see how each of these paths may affect you. And obviously this is going to vary from person to person, and this is speaking from subjective experience. It's not going to be the same for everybody. But these are just my personal takeaways and kind of what I see as I observe these different routes that people might take. And as like a reference point, you probably at this point of the show know what an independent artist is, but if you're new to the show or if you just want a bit of a refresher, an independent artist is, first off, just simply independent. They're not signed to a label. They're not connected to necessarily a different company, a higher up or whatever. There's some nuance to that, and I'll talk about that when I get to that section, but some examples of that might be Sam Bowman, Xander Salos, Jay Staff, Jordan Blaine, Grace Graver, Brian Bolivar, etc., etc. These different artists where they're doing it on their own accord. They're not necessarily a part of a label or signed necessarily. Again, I'll get to that when we get to that section of the episode. Small caveat I forgot to say before we kind of jumped in. I'm in a new studio now, like genuine studio, I guess you could say, because I have a space in our basement, but it isn't just like a decrepit little area in the basement. I have a nice, much more open area than the old office I was working in upstairs, where it's all painted, looks nice. I've got things a little bit more spread out, and it's just cool. And I've got some new equipment since then. Like for Christmas, I got a MIDI keyboard, and I also purchased a drum kit, which I forget if I had mentioned that before in the last episode. I can't remember when that all played out. But yeah, the studio is kind of coming together as a genuine studio, not just an office space or where I go to the treehouse to record. So treehouse is fun, but it's kind of nice to have a genuine dedicated space for all of this. But back on point, I will be showing it off in a video either sometime around this release, I believe. I'm not sure if it'll come before or after, but I will create that in the near future. However, if you're following on Instagram, you're probably going to see small sneak peeks, photos, videos, etc., that are in the studio at the very least. So yeah, it's a cool space, and I'm excited to show it off to all of you guys and just to have it for use. Anyway, back on into the topics. First off, we're going to talk about going mainstream and kind of the pros and cons of that. First off, let's just set this aside. When you go mainstream, you obviously have a lot more financial support. You have an entire team to help you out and different people that are pouring money into investing in this, as well as just like you have access to share your music with more people. You're doing tours. Money comes a little bit easier. Now, you're still, you have public opinion of your music. So if people don't like your music, then they don't stream it, go to your shows, and you don't make as much money. However, just like as a rule of thumb, if you're doing well in mainstream music, then you're going to be making more money because more people are hearing you and therefore paying for your stuff or contributing through streaming, which again doesn't pay you a whole lot, but everything kind of plays together to earn you more money, which gives you more freedom to do different things. And at least as long as people enjoy you, a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Less stress as money coming in, or you're more comfortable in terms of that is your salary, your pay, etc. It's more stable. And I know doing music and earning money is never predictable and it's not always stable, but being mainstream and popular to some extent gives you a bit more stability than some of the other routes. So that's one of the pros, obviously. Second off, you have more opportunities, typically speaking, because you have connections with other people in the industry as a whole. I want to put a little asterisk next to that because there are a lot of things you can do as an independent artist. However, kind of off the bat, you have a lot of resources at your fingertips from people in your label helping you with different parts of the process, whether that is the production side of things, marketing, getting connected with other artists in your area or just other artists that are doing significantly well and trying to set up co-writes, collaborations, and all that type of stuff. It comes a little bit easier. I don't know. Again, let me put this caveat. I have not experienced mainstream music because I am not even releasing music yet. However, just as a rule of thumb, and from many interviews I've listened to, you do have those things a little bit easier to access. And it does come with some downsides being in that situation, but there's more access to all of that. And as I kind of touched on already, you have more widespread exposure, especially in terms of radio. Radio is still quite at large. Like, even though a lot of people are turning into smaller artists and listening to these different artists that you might not hear as often or not as many people know about, radio still is a huge driver, especially in older generations, but even in younger generations, and a great way to get popular. Because if you're listening to Christian radio, obviously you'll learn some new artists that way. And I feel like, in my opinion, it's a little bit harder to find independent Christian artists that really scratch the itch you're looking for in a certain type of music sometimes. Maybe that's just me, but so it's a little bit easier to find new stuff on Christian radio. Pop radio is not that much because you can still find other people doing certain types of music just if you do a quick Spotify search. I feel like Christian radio is a big part of getting new artists popular. It's not the only thing. For instance, if you take somebody like Josiah Queen or Forrest Frank had a decent following already, but some of his songs, a lot of that was driven through social media, which I don't want to undermine. That is a big player in helping you get popular or get to a lot of people. There's a lot more that goes into keeping that momentum and keeping people interested in your music. That's something I'm not as experienced in, nor is that the topic of today's episode. But yes, Instagram is a huge driver in that, especially in stuff that can have broad appeal. While it is a Christian song, Up by Forrest Frank and Connor Price. Non-Christians can typically enjoy that, and I feel like that's part of the reason that songs like that get such a large following. But anyway, Christian radio is a big part in getting the majority of Christian music listeners, because I would say, based on what I see, that we have a lot of young Christian listeners, but a large demographic of the Christian listening space or whatever, Christian music listeners, are in the older generations. They're, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up. You have a lot of people who are still dedicated to listening to Christian radio and don't necessarily use streaming as much, or even if they do use streaming, sometimes they'll tune into stations or playlists that are more of what is on the radio. So if you get exposure on the radio as a Christian artist, you normally unlock more an audience that isn't necessarily going to hear about you in other ways. So having that exposure through radio is very helpful. It doesn't always translate the same into pop, as I feel like there's more options, quote unquote, in like independent pop artists. It's easier to just look up the type of vibe or stuff you're looking for and find a slew of artists, where I feel like while there are a good amount of independent Christian artists, certain sounds and genres, there's not a ton of Christian artists in those spaces. And again, this is not hard fact or anything. That's just kind of what I've experienced thus far. So the radio space is a huge helper in finding that new stuff. And in turn, if people are hearing you on the radio, that'll help boost typically the amount of people that are listening to you. But I've been on that topic for far too long. Long story short, mainstream gives you a lot of opportunities, especially that you wouldn't have on the smaller side of Christian music. You have opportunities to go on tour, especially with other artists in those beginning years. You have the ability to connect with other people where they can do certain things that you're not as skilled with, like social media marketing and just setting up co-writes and getting you some of the connections that otherwise would be a little bit difficult, especially if you're a smaller artist trying to connect with a bigger artist. If you're under a label, that gives you some sort of credibility. You've got a manager. You've got all these different things. However, here's some of the hard parts of it. First off, to get into the mainstream Christian music industry, you normally have to have a good amount of talent. And what's the word I'm looking for? You don't need as much talent to be an independent artist because, first off, not necessarily that people will listen to you, but you can just do it. You don't have to meet a certain standard before you're admitted into the industry. As an independent artist, you can get into doing those stuff. Whereas if you're trying to go into the industry, sign on with a record label, big or small, they're typically looking for, obviously, they want you to be a good singer. Normally, they're looking for some decently high standards, but it's not always the case. And then, obviously, if you're a decent songwriter, that helps. Not every singer is a great songwriter. Sometimes they're better at co-writes, or they work off of songs written from other people, because you have staff writers, that's what it's called, where they are hired by a label just to write songs, work with other people. Sometimes they sing on their own stuff, but they'll write those songs and they get paid when another artist essentially buys it to use on their record or as a single. So they're looking for a level of talent in people looking to get signed on into the industry. And you can see other artists that aren't necessarily as crazily vocally talented as like Lauren Daigle or something. But by most of the time, you're going to see a lot of artists are pretty darn good at what they're doing if they're being signed to a label. There's caveats, as with everything, but that's the main observation I've made. One instance of somebody who was independent and went more mainstream, I would say recently that I've been looking at, is Bay Turner. He's an amazing singer. Like, this guy has got a voice that is insane. But he had a song called Brand New, and I forget if he released it then signed or signed then released, but his vocal talent caught the attention of whatever label he's on. I can't even remember. But now he's playing some pretty darn big shows with other artists. He's not the headlining artist, but when he's traveling, he's on Christian radio, so he's seen a large boost once he took that. And that's kind of an example of how when you sign on, it can give you a lot of opportunity and boost in the amount of listeners you have. But again, that might not always be what you're looking for. I think another big thing to consider is that while there's a lot of great Christian labels out there, you need to be careful when signing record deals. I'm going to put a big disclaimer right here, or at least you hear it. I've never signed a label. I've never been in a room with somebody signing a label. I've only heard podcasts about people signing labels, record deals. However, here's a big thing that I've noticed across tens of, close to 100 artists that I've listened to. You need to be careful as to what you're signing on to, because first off, these are companies and they are looking to make money. And sometimes some of these Christian labels are owned by larger companies that aren't necessarily Christian. So it's a company. They need to make money, and therefore they're going to look for the best way to do that. Some labels are much better about not exploiting their artists, while some, there's been stories of this label did not treat me well. They basically stole the copyright to all of my music through making me sign some shady deals in the music, or I didn't make a whole lot off of what I was creating. So you need to be careful that when you're signing with somebody, again, from what I've heard, you're weighing the different options. Don't just take the first record label deal that's thrown at you, because oftentimes the first one that's going to be thrown your way isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for you. And don't just take it because it was offered to you. You need to take something because it actually is helping further you in the direction you want to go. However, if it is a deal that is mutually beneficial, it's something that you really feel passionate about and you think would be a good fit, then go ahead. Give it plenty of prayer and consideration. Don't remove that fact from it. That's a very important part of making any sort of decision, but especially something that big. But yeah, don't take the first deal that's passed your way, because sometimes it's not the best fit, sometimes it's not at the right time, and sometimes they are going to exploit you a little bit if you aren't careful. So weigh the pros and cons, look at what it's actually saying, maybe find somebody who can give you some more like in-depth help about exactly what this contract is entailing, and then you can move forward with either yes or no. I think a big thing to also consider, I said that for the last thing, but it's also how it affects you, your mentality, your energy, and all that kind of stuff. Because when you're going mainstream, this is your main job most of the time. That, of course, is meaning that you're going to be putting a lot of time and energy into this. And in a lot of different ways, you're still putting time and energy into music, but this is like your be-all, end-allness sometimes. Because this is your job. This is what is giving you income. This is how you're sustaining yourself. And therefore, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, from writing, working on your music. Sometimes you are producing your own music and just getting everything ready, whether that's playing shows and performing, all these different things that go into it, because you need to have that income flow. So it takes a lot out of you, and it can cause burnout. And I know that there's many stories of artists that felt burnt out, and some recover, some don't. And that's another thing you need to weigh. Is going that hard going to take a huge toll on you? Are you going to still love the craft when you're doing it that hard? Some people will say with a resounding yes, I am ready to get on that track. Some others might have to double back and be like, okay, is this really the path I want to take? Will I still enjoy what I'm doing? Or is it going to be something where I'm like, I'm tired of this, I'm done? So is it causing burnout? And of course, there's just stress and pressure sometimes, because any sort of music that you're, relying on income from is at the mercy of public opinion. If people like your music, you get more streams, more people come to your show, more income coming. As soon as people don't like it, then gone. Your income is going to drop significantly, and that can be stressful for some people. So that's something you have to consider. Is that what you want to put your money or your work towards? Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just something you need to give some good consideration to. Finally, you are in the public spotlight when you're a mainstream artist. With more people hearing you and seeing you, more people are watching your every move, as creepily as that sounds, especially the more popular and famous you get. And as a Christian, we need to be very aware of that. To whom much is given, much is required. And, if you have a lot, of popularity, a lot of people know who you are, you're going to be held up to much more scrutiny. Unfortunately, people who are in the spotlight are held to near impossible standards sometimes. And there are certain things that are unfortunately going to be the case in terms of like, you need to be this good as a person, as a Christian. When you are in the public spotlight, there is a high level you are being held to, because almost everything you do is being watched by people. Your life is on, everybody can see your life. And obviously, if you're smaller but signed, it's not as big. However, the bigger you get, the more eyes you have on you, and of course, the more scrutiny you're going to be held to. So first off, that takes a toll on anybody, because everybody's watching what you're doing, but also it's important to note that what you're doing is being watched. So even if you do something that's like not really a bad thing, it's kind of harmless, but it could be perceived in one way or another, whether that's something you say online or just a joke you make. It's not necessarily bad, and there's a lot of different things you can do, and I'm sure you guys can think of stuff on your own. However, regardless of what it is, or if it's genuinely bad, when everybody sees it, there's going to be opinions thrown everywhere. People will talk about what you do, obviously in the Christian realm, but also on top of that, other people from the outside looking in are looking at who you are, non-Christians, non-believers. And if they see somebody who's acting carelessly and not really showing who Christ is in what they're doing, then they're going to unfortunately judge you as well as a majority of people, because oftentimes, even within the church, people will see the bad in one person and blanket statement over everybody that, oh, because this person thinks it's okay to do this, then the whole church must be bad. That's why people are driven out of the church so often, at large, or even just one individual, where you have one or two people in the church that are not showing who Christ genuinely is, and it drives somebody out, and they say that church is bad, or the church at whole is bad because of some bad people. And unfortunately, it's the way the world works. So if people see a actual Christian, whether it's something that is genuinely bad or isn't necessarily bad but can be perceived in a wrong light, then a lot of people might be turned off to Christianity as a whole. And I'm sure that's not what any of us want. So you need to be aware that you have a lot of eyes on you when you are in that public spotlight. In any different role, when you profess to be a Christian, and you have that many eyes on you, the world is going to be watching. The world already is watching to see if we are who we say we are. And every time we slip up and make a mistake, we are reminded of it. And as unfortunate as it is, it can turn many people off. Mistake or just something that was interpreted not the way we intended it to be. So you have to be so insanely aware of that. Just like preachers who are held to a higher standard, as the decisions they make can oftentimes affect an entire congregation. Very similarly, I would think that a public figure like an artist who has influence over people, believe it or not, they're going to be held to a decent standard. For the amount of people you affect, you need to be aware of what you're doing to them, because it will be, God's not holding us accountable in the light that, oh, you messed up like this dictator. However, what we do, we will have to answer for. And we don't want to be the reason that many people see Christianity and turn away from it because they see one reckless action or one joke that maybe goes a little too far. Again, tons of different things that can happen, and there's tons of good, genuinely good meaning people that can make a mistake, and it can make a big difference. And it's not necessarily that they're a bad person. It's just that needs to be keenly understood, that the amount of eyes on you is much increased when you're in the public spotlight. One thing I forgot to mention was just like the compromises you might have to make in mainstream artists, as a mainstream artist, because there's certain things you may want to do as a mainstream artist. However, you might not be able to. Like, certain things might be in at the moment, like certain sounds, genres, types of songs, etc. So maybe something that's a little bit different from the stuff that's popular at the time might not be greenlit. You might write the song, maybe even get it produced, and the label's like, we don't feel very confident in this right now, so you need to shelve it. You might not be able to do everything you want. So that's another thing to consider. How much creative freedom do you want? And then finally, moving on to the faith aspect. Faith, obviously, is a pretty core part of being a Christian, and everything you do shapes your worldview and either strengthens or changes it in rough terms. When you're in a position with that much fame, whether it's large or small, any amount of fame can get to somebody, and you can respond in many different ways, but there's really two ways at the heart of it that you can go about it. One, you can just embrace it and be like, whoa, look at how cool I am. I'm famous. People love me, and let it get to your head. Or you can turn it back and be like, thank you, God, for what you've given me in this platform you've given me to speak about you and sing about you and all these different things. And if you're not one who can manage that very well, that is going to affect your faith. It's going to drive more of an inward approach to everything. It's going to be, look at me, look at how good I am, look at what I've done, instead of look at what God's given me, look at the platform he's given me to use to promote him. So if you're not one who can manage that very well, then this might not be the route for you to take, because jeopardizing your faith and who you are as a Christian is never worth any of this. Like, if you had to completely drop music just for the sake of keeping your faith at the heart of your life, then that is the more important thing to do. Music, even Christian music, isn't more important than keeping a genuine, true faith that you cannot compromise values for what you want. That is never an option. While we might think it's an option, it should not be, as it is not right. Christ should be at the center of everything we're doing, and that should never be compromised or, well, it's okay if, because it's not. All right, that was a long one. Hopefully I can keep this next one and the second one after that a bit more brief. But I got a little preachy there. So the next path is just a hobby. And yeah, it's about as basic as it sounds. A hobby is just like something you enjoy. You might share it on YouTube or you might post it on Spotify, but it's pretty leisurely. It's pretty laxed. You're just doing it for the fun of it. There's really no stress there because you're just doing it for fun. There might be some monetary gain in there if something gets a little bit popular on a platform, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot of stake in it. It's just when you have the free time, you might sit down and write something or do some production work, but it's pretty like, okay, I'm having fun with this. I don't have time right now. I'll go do something else. I've got to get some stuff done. It's not like, oh, I need to get this done by XYZ. There's not really deadlines. You can set some goals and stuff for yourself, but there's no pressure. Nothing that has to be done because you're doing it for the fun of it. And for a lot of people, that is great. Like, if that's all you want to do with your music, kudos to you. Personally, I want to create stuff and try and make some money off of it. Not for the sake of monetary gain, but rather to be able to like do this, share what I'm working on with the people here and around the world, whatever, and just kind of share my perspective on certain topics and in a Christian light and create stuff that people will enjoy and hopefully get a little bit of something back for that to help continue moving forward and also not, be able to commit more time to it and know that it's actually helping me income-wise and all that. It might probably not going to be my main job. However, I would like to make something off of it so that I can kind of commit more time to it and not feel like, oh, I'm wasting time working on this when I need to make money. So it will help support me still. But anyway, as someone who's just doing it as a hobby, you, regardless of what age you are, whether high schooler, out of college, whenever you are in life, if you have a full-time job or just on the side, it's just something you necessarily do in your free time. It's not a all the time commit, I have to make this many songs in a year to make X amount of money. You're just having fun. You're just enjoying it. The pros to this is the creative freedom. You can do quite literally anything you want because aside from like if you did something super stupid and people saw it online, for the most part, you can do anything you want, create any type of song you want, and there's absolutely no pressure. That's the great side of it being just a hobby. A large amount of freedom. The cons are obviously when you are doing at your own leisure, then there's not going to be a whole lot of financial gain. And obviously, if you're going in as a hobby, then that's probably not what you're after. But that's just something if you're thinking about, oh, I'll just do this on the side, then you're probably going to be forfeiting any sort of money you could potentially make off of it. Again, there might be rare instances where something gets super popular or something like that. Or maybe you even do some small shows for the fun of it and you make a little something off of that. But for the most part, you're going to be making little to nothing off of it being simply a hobby. And it's more so just for your own enjoyment, a way for you to express. Maybe it's expressing worship through different types of songs or just telling stories and hoping people enjoy what you have to create. But it's for the fun of it. It's not for any sort of financial gain. That's more so a bonus than anything else. Another con to it is that a busy life can restrict the amount you can do. When you can't commit time to it because you need to work or something and you're not making money off of it, then it's hard to say, oh, I'm going to carve out time from making money or something like that just to do music, because then you're losing, not necessarily losing out, but it might be money that you need to, continue staying afloat, paying any sort of rent or house bills or electricity or basic necessities. Whereas when you step away from that to do music, you're not really going to make anything, and therefore you might feel a little more stressed out. So anytime things get busy, it's pretty hard to say, okay, I'm going to carve out time for this because there's other things that need to be done that actually do move you forward, whereas music isn't necessarily doing that for you. So it's great. You don't progress very fast when it's a hobby typically, again, because of that time constraint. But if it's only meant to be something you enjoy and hopefully some other people enjoy what you're making, then it's a great route to take. It doesn't have to have any sort of stress connected to it. It's just simply for your own fun and enjoyment, and it can be a great way to express worship to God and just kind of process things. As a lot of people, even in larger spaces, larger positions as artists, use it as a way to process their emotions, things, stories they have to tell, etc. In terms of the faith aspect in this, it's low pressure. It's not really going to make or break or affect your faith in a positive or bad way. Okay, I retract that. It can affect, I would believe, in a positive light, because if you're focusing on genuine Christian music, then it might be a almost not devotional time, but like a time of reflection where you're reflecting on different things that have happened in your life, different emotions you're having, and you can come to God with those, almost like David writing the Psalms. So, yeah, it can actually still have a positive effect on your faith. However, it's not necessarily, if it's just casual, going to have any negative effects on your faith if, again, it's Christian music and you're centered at just like doing it for fun, doing it as a form of worship, etc. So, yeah, that's the hobbyist approach. Finally, my personal choice, and I know the choice of many others, including those listening, is the independent artist. So this is kind of a way where you can balance passion, what you enjoy doing, with actually making something off of what you're working on, because it needs to be sustainable if you're going to commit a large amount of time to it. I think we can all be in agreement there. If you're not making any money off of being an artist, writing and creating songs, it's kind of hard to say, yes, I'm going to commit this much time to it, because there's other things that do need to be done. So if you're going to commit some time to it, it's typically you're looking to get something out of it, not necessarily just to get rich, because that's not what's going to happen with independent artists anyway, but rather it's still like it's worth your time, for instance, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it's balancing those two things. The pros of this are obviously it actually gives you the ability to, first off, build out the kind of career you want. There's a lot of minute details and different paths you can take within the independent artist space. You can simply be a bedroom creator where you just write your songs, produce them, and release them on whatever basis you'd like, frequent or infrequent. Typically you have some structure there, but it allows you to kind of do it at that pace, or you can have a dedicated studio space in your home, but you can kind of take different routes while still being in that independent, balancing where your passion lines up with the amount of time and effort you want to put into it, while still being like enough effort that it's more than just a hobby. Anyway, you have a large amount of creative freedom, as while there's certain things you might try to do, or you might stay in a certain genre for the most part, due to the fact that you want to have like a dedicated audience who comes back and enjoys what you're creating, you can still go in some more interesting ways. I'll give an example from Sam Bowman, because I listen to him all the time, as you guys, again, probably already know. He's written tons of different songs. He's mainly in the EDM space, and he's done a couple different like fun things. One thing he did was Boss Level with Matthew Parker, where first off, it's not a song. It's literally just like heavy beat drops and cool music stuff that's just fun to listen to, and also a little chaotic and crazy. And that was very different from what he makes. Like, it's EDM, but it's not a song. And they were basically it was like Ready Player One, and then one of them made a beat drop, and then transitions Ready Player Two, and then the other person made a beat drop and everything. It was fun. It's cool. I'll link it down below so you can go check it out. But yeah, that was a very different project, which probably would not happen unless you created your own artist project and did that on the side, unrelated to the label. That probably wouldn't happen if you were a mainstream artist. In fact, I almost guarantee it wouldn't. So yeah, you can do some different fun out there stuff, and there's less stuff at stake. You're not necessarily like, oh, this is going to break my career or anything like that. And there's not the pressure of, oh, we're not going to let you release that because it doesn't line up with XYZ. So you have more creative freedom. I think, honestly, another big thing is that as an independent artist, you have a much more niche committed community. And that's because partly it's smaller. You can have a large audience. You can have several thousands, even hundreds of thousands of followers, but you still have that like niche community. You have those people that you start to build a relationship with, whether that is in person or online. And obviously you need to be careful with online relationships. That's a whole nother thing. But you do start to build that community, and people that you know are going to come back time and time again, be supportive, sometimes give genuine good feedback on the stuff you're working on. So I think that community is a big aspect of it that I genuinely am seeking. That's like one of the big things I really want. People that I can like know are enjoying it. And while you still have a lot of people that you know are enjoying your stuff, for instance, there was a guy, I think it was a husband and wife actually, who went to like almost every single show of a tour Matthew West went on. First off, I have no idea how you have the financial money to do that. Like, not to say that the tickets were super expensive, but going to every single show or most of the shows on a whole tour, across several states. Beyond crazy to me. But so he got to get to know those people because they were at every single show. However, that's not the norm. And having that smaller community allows you to kind of build connection and have a genuine community, not just like a couple people out of the crowd that you're like, oh yeah, I know them, or I know them. So I think that's cool. It's nice to have those people that like get really excited about what you're working on and you can know are going to be there time and time again. So that's one of the big things. And here's the one thing I was talking about way at the beginning of the episode before I started rambling on and on, is that you're not signed to a label, so you don't necessarily have all of the opportunities that come with that, especially in terms of finances and doing shows and all that. However, there is like a half independent, half popular mainstream-esque thing you can do, and that's where certain labels have either a portion of their label or a sub-label under them that is dedicated to independent artists. Another big disclaimer right here, I don't have, if I didn't have much experience in terms of signing labels, I really don't have much experience in this, so I'm really just talking out of the little bit I've seen around it. But basically, certain labels will sometimes have sub-labels or portions of their labels dedicated to independent artists. So you sign with them, but you're not necessarily signing over things to a record label. For instance, like you still get to do what you want. Sometimes you have a certain amount of stuff they would like you to release and all that type of stuff. For instance, Dream Label Group is a really good example. I believe Gladden is on it. Sam Bowman is on there. Matthew Parker is on there. And I don't know if Xander is on there, but I know he's done some stuff with people on there. So sometimes it gives them like help in terms of promoting their music, or there is, certain financial help and whatnot. In turn, they get a certain kickback or a certain amount of stuff released. So there's different ways to go about that, and that is a route that a lot of different people have taken, and it's really helpful while still giving full control over what they're doing in the artist's hands. It's not like the industry is, or the label is coming in and reaching in, like I'm showing with my hands, even though you can't see, and just like controlling and micromanaging what they're working on. So you'd have to talk to somebody with a lot more experience in that than me. However, that's just another route that you can take. There's also like distribution deals where you can, I think Jordan Blaine signed on with a certain distribution company that helps that side of things. Wings, I think Wings is the one indie label or whatever that gives those resources that in normal industry sign-ons, normal label sign-ons would get while still keeping it independent. So there's a vast amount of stuff in there, way beyond what I know anything about, and there's a lot of people you could talk to, such as Grace Graber, Jordan Blaine, Sam Bowman, if you want to reach out to them and be like, hey, how do these different things work? I'm just looking at these options. They would be some great people to talk to, and I'm sure you can find tons of stuff online on those different websites. So while still staying independent, you can have some access to some financial help in turn for a bit of a trade-off, for instance, without it being fully mainstream and giving up some of that freedom that I'm sure you're looking for in the independent space. So that's another another pro. You can do more cool things and still have some of that help while not being fully committed to a record label and be like, this is what you have to do. The cons, again, limited financial resources. Having those label different indie artists aids are helpful, but they're not necessarily everything that you're going to get from signing on to a record label, because it's just not the same thing. It's very different. You get certain help, but it's not the same thing. However, there is good help. It's just not going to be the same. So a little bit tighter financial. You're not going to be making as much money as well. Obviously, regardless, we're not in it for the gain of money, but depending on how much time you commit, it's going to be how much you get out of it. And sometimes you do need a little bit more out of it to make it worthwhile and be able to sustain yourself financially, because let's be honest, the world runs on money, and without it, you kind of are going to be living on the streets. Another thing is that anything you do as an artist is self-managed. Whether you're an artist who's writing and producing their own music, or writing and having another producer, you have to pay that producer. Marketing, either you're marketing yourself or you're paying somebody else to market. Booking shows, either you're booking shows or you're paying somebody else to help you book shows. And either that's committing a lot of time and you have to learn these skills, or you have to make a lot more money to then be able to do all of that. So a lot of it comes to, you have to do it in-house, which means you have to juggle a lot of different skills, which is both valuable as being able to have those as a person, but also takes a lot of time. So that is a quote unquote con. I mean, learning those skills is great, but it obviously takes a lot of time and commitment and learning a lot of different things, both digitally and just people, person to person interactions, and knowing how to reach out and all that kind of stuff. So that is another thing to consider. Another big thing is that as a mainstream artist, you're obviously going to probably be playing some bigger shows, at least bigger by independent standards. Like you have well over 1,000 people at a decent amount of shows, especially if you're touring with a bigger artist. However, as an independent artist, putting shows together are normally going to be somewhat of a local thing, or if you do an actual tour, those are a little bit harder to put together. One option or one thing that I thought was pretty cool was the Friends tour. It was people like Jordan Blaine, Katie Reynolds. Who else was on that? There was like 4 or 5 different artists, and they rotated who played at the different shows, and they were house and church shows. That was another cool thing, and that's something you can do, but it takes a lot more effort to pull together the finances and the proper things to get a tour set up. And most of the time, you're not going to be playing at big venues. It's going to be for smaller groups. So if touring is a big thing that you really, really want to do, then either you're going to have to find what works for you as an independent artist, or maybe go more of the mainstream route. And then, of course, the faith aspect. This is, I mean, let's see, how do I phrase this? As an independent artist with the creative freedom, you are able to do and say anything you want, and even touch on topics that mainstream Christian radio typically would shy away from. Whether that's like sad or darker stories or whatever that is. Obviously, don't do something that's like anti-Christian, but you're able to go places that normally they're not going to go on mainstream radio, which is a cool thing. It gives you, again, that creative freedom. But also, like, when you have a bit of that pressure taken off, there's still the pressure and stress of like, okay, this is partially my job, so I have to get certain things done, and you have to set certain deadlines for yourself or things won't get done. However, you have a lot of less stress on you, and without all of that fame and all that stuff that has to happen, you're able to still focus, I would think, a little bit more on what it's all for. Because ultimately, whatever we're creating on any level, from the smallest hobbyist to the largest Christian artist on the planet, it should always come back to, who is this for? This is for Christ, to encourage his believers, our brothers and sisters in Christ, create material that churches can use in worship, and hopefully lead others to learn and understand who Christ is. And even if we're not the one who ultimately brings them to Christ, being that seed, that inkling that's like, okay, this seems a little bit different, I want to look into this more, is so important to keep at the heart of everything. So if as soon as we lose sight of that, it's like, what's the point of it anymore? But yeah, remembering that, like, when we have it on a bit of a smaller scale, it's easier to manage that quote unquote fame, because we're not necessarily famous. There's a lot of people who know about us, and we have followers and supporters, but it's a little easier to keep that ego in check and remember the point of it all. That's kind of, I think, the sweet spot in all of it, because you can do what you love, you can worship God through it, and you can bring encouragement to others while still keeping it all in check and remembering who this is all about, and not letting it get all about me. It still is an issue that you can fall into the trap of. Any amount of popularity or fame, even in like a small group of 10 people at school, can cause that. But it's a little bit easier to keep that thing in check and remember what the point of it all is. All right, that was a very long episode. I'm sure we're in like the 50-minute mark. I need to edit some stuff down. I might trim some unnecessary stuff out of here. But in conclusion, the things we've talked about today are the different paths you could take. The smallest being just a hobbyist. You're doing it for the fun of it. Independent is the next level, where it is partially or sometimes even fully your career, but it gives you a lot of creative freedom, and you're doing a lot of it in-house. And then signing onto a record label, somewhat difficult sometimes, because you have to have a certain level of talent or a certain level of skill to be able to do that. But that's like the biggest. That's getting you on radio pretty consistently, as long as you're doing well. Whereas independent artists, that's a little bit more of a struggle. Hobbyists, probably forget about it. But yeah, so those are kind of 3 tiers. No one is better than the other in terms of like, this is just great. It's more so like, what is your goal in music? And that's what I challenge you to think about today, and I'd love to know about it in the comments below. What are you trying to achieve with your music? Is it to have, like, be a household name? Is it to share it with tons and tons of people? Is it supposed to be for a certain group of people? Maybe you're tailoring your music toward a certain people who only listen to a certain type of music or a certain age demographic, etc., etc. Or maybe you're just doing it as a hobbyist for the fun of it and enjoying music for what it is. Thinking about what route you're going to take and what you want to do with your music is going to greatly impact the next steps you take in that process. Again, no one is greater than the other. It's more so, what are you trying to go after? What do you feel called to do? Give it prayer, give it thought. Is it something that you feel God is saying, hey, I want you to pursue this as a career? Or is it something that it's more like, okay, I've given you this gift. You don't have to do it doesn't have to be this big, massive thing. It can be something more intimate between you and God, or something that you create for your local church even. Working with people at your church to maybe create songs tailored to certain things that are going on in your congregation. That's some stuff I've heard about, especially with Brian Pulliver. So tons of cool stuff, tons of different routes you can take. Just weigh what you need, what are the resources you're going to get at each level, what are the different things you can do within each level, and what is it that you feel called to do and you want to pursue. Give it lots of prayer, give it lots of thought, talk with people that you trust to get some insight and opinion. The discussion question today, like I mentioned, I want to know what you guys are thinking about doing. What path is it that you want to take? And this might evolve over time. Maybe it starts out as a small hobby, and eventually God is calling you, okay, let's take this to the next step. But as of right now, what do you feel called to do? What is it that you'd like to do with all of this? And maybe what are some of the interesting things that you would do within each level of the music? Like, say you chose independent, what is some specific things that you're looking to do within that realm of creating? I'd love to know that in the comments below, both on YouTube as well as on Spotify, as there is a commenting section on there now. So love to hear from you guys. With all of that being said, I'm sure this is going to be a long one, but that is the end of episode 15 of Songsmith. Thank you guys for tuning in, as always. Next episode, we're going to be talking about, should you always finish your songs? As early on in the show, I mentioned you should always finish your songs, but I'm kind of second guessing that now, and I'll tell you some of the reasons in that episode, some certain reasons as why you don't necessarily have to finish every little thing you write. On top of that, I'd love if you subscribed, shared the podcast episode on whatever platform you listen to. Do all the things, because I don't need to say subscribe, like all that kind of stuff. It does really help the show. I love hearing from you guys when you comment down below, so feel free to jump down there and say anything you'd like, whether it's a discussion question or just want to say hi. You can follow me on Instagram to stay up to date with the show, as well as just things I'm working on personally, whether it's music or just fun things I'm doing in my life and all of that kind of stuff. But with that being said, again, I thank you guys so much for tuning into episode 15 and sticking with the show as long as you have. Or if you're a newcomer, thank you for joining us, and I'll see you guys around next episode. As always, keep on writing.